Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to unravel one of the biggest questions in history. How did a single gunshot in a city most people hadn't heard of manage to drag the entire world into the Great War? It's a wild story, so let's get right into it.
I mean, really think about that for a second. How does one assassination lead to a global war that kills 20 million people? It seems impossible, right? Well, to get it, you have to understand that it wasn't just about the spark. It was about the fact that the entire continent of Europe was basically a room drenched in gasoline. So, our story kicks off not in some grand palace, but on a city street. The day is June 28, 1914, and the place is Sarajevo, a city in what was then the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Okay, so you've got Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the whole empire, visiting the city. Earlier that morning, someone had already tried to kill him with a bomb, and failed. But then, his driver takes a wrong turn, and by an unbelievable twist of fate, that wrong turn puts his car right in front of another assassin, a young guy named Gavrilo Princip. He doesn't miss. 2 shots are fired. And just like that, the fuse for the entire world is lit.
But like I said, a spark is only a spark. It needs something to burn. And boy, was Europe ready to burn in 1914. It was a powder keg of old grudges, new rivalries, and huge ambitions, all just waiting for an excuse to explode.
So, what was in that powder keg? Well, for starters, you had imperialism. For decades, the big European powers had been in this frantic race to grab up colonies all over the world. You know, Britain and France had these massive empires, and a newly powerful Germany desperately wanted its own place in the sun. This created this constant, simmering tension and competition for land and resources, especially across Africa and Asia.
At the very same time, you had this other powerful idea bubbling up from below: nationalism. This was the belief that people who shared a culture and a language should have their own country. So inside these huge, sprawling empires like Austria-Hungary, you had all these different ethnic groups like the Serbs who were starting to demand their independence. It was creating massive cracks in the foundations of the old European order.
So you've got these 2 huge forces pushing and pulling against each other. On one hand, imperialism is about big empires trying to get even bigger. And on the other, nationalism is about smaller groups trying to break free. They were basically 2 sides of the same coin, this intense, passionate belief that your people deserve to be on top. And this clash created these deep, dangerous fault lines that were about to split the whole continent in 2.
All right, so the final ingredient that made this whole situation so incredibly dangerous was this tangled, confusing web of military alliances. Now, these agreements were supposed to keep the peace, for protection, but what they really did was create a tripwire. One little conflict could now trigger a continent-wide catastrophe.
So basically, Europe had broken into 2 major gangs. You had the Triple Entente, that's France, Britain, and Russia, who were all getting a little nervous about Germany's growing strength. And then you had the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. But the really crucial one, the one you have to watch, is that smaller pact. Russia had sworn to protect Serbia. That little promise was about to become the first domino to fall.
And this is exactly what went down after the assassination. It was a perfect, unstoppable chain reaction. Austria-Hungary blames Serbia and declares war. Russia, true to its word, starts getting its huge army ready to defend Serbia. Germany sees its ally, Austria-Hungary, threatened, so it declares war on Russia. And bam! That drags in Russia's allies, France and Britain. The dominoes just fell, one after another, in a matter of weeks.
Even in all this chaos, there were moments, little windows where diplomacy could have won. But one country made a decision so bold, so fateful, that it basically slammed the door shut on any chance for peace. This right here, this is the point of no return. Germany gave its ally, Austria-Hungary, what historians now call the blank check. It was literally a promise of unconditional, no questions asked support for whatever they decided to do to Serbia. This wasn't just backing up a friend, this was giving them a permission slip to start a war, knowing full well that Germany would foot the bill militarily.
So you have to ask, why would Germany do something so reckless? A big part of it was this thing called the spirit of 1914. There was this feeling in the air, a kind of patriotic fever, that a war was actually a good thing, that it was necessary to prove Germany was a top-tier world power. So, with Germany's blank check in their pocket and huge crowds cheering them on at home, Austria-Hungary felt confident enough to make war inevitable.
And the result of all these ambitions and failed politics? A war on a scale the world had literally never seen. They called it the Great War. They even called it the war to end all wars.
but its human cost was beyond anything anyone could have imagined. For 4 long, brutal years, new weapons like the machine gun and poison gas created a kind of industrial-scale slaughter. The numbers are just mind-boggling. In total, you're looking at over 40 million casualties. Let's really break that down for a second.
20 million soldiers killed. Just try to picture that. An entire generation of young men from across the globe, just gone, wiped out in the mud and the trenches. And on top of that, another 21 million were wounded. And we're not talking about minor injuries. Millions were left permanently disabled, scarred for life, both on the outside and the inside. This war didn't just redraw the map of the world, it scarred the human soul.
The guns finally fell silent in 1918, and the peace treaty that came next, the famous Treaty of Versailles, was supposed to make sure this could never, ever happen again, mainly by punishing Germany. But as it turns out, the peace it created was built on incredibly shaky ground. And that's really the final haunting question, isn't it? By forcing Germany to accept all the blame and pay crippling reparations, the treaty didn't heal the wounds of the war. It poured salt on them. It created economic chaos and deep, bitter resentment. And in doing so, it unintentionally created the perfect fertile ground for extremism to rise, setting the stage for an even more destructive war just 2 decades later.